The Golden Snitch. Most people watch Harry Potter catch the snitch in his first ever Quidditch match without a second thought. Small golden ball, silver wings. Catches it, game over. What the films never told you is that before Bowman Wright came along in the 1300s, that golden ball was a living bird, and catching it meant crushing it to death in front of an entire stadium. The wizarding world watched this happen for centuries, and apparently nobody thought it was worth bringing up. Wright crafted a walnut-sized golden ball with silver wings that replicated the Snidget's speed and flight patterns exactly, without the part where a living creature died at the end of every match. Every catch Harry ever made, every moment Victor Crumb caught the snitch at the World Cup while Bulgaria still lost on points. All of it traces back to one man who looked at the sport and decided it could stand to be slightly less murderous. And this is where it gets more interesting. The snitch carries flesh memory, meaning it permanently remembers the first human hand that ever touched it. Makers wear gloves specifically because of this, and that single detail is precisely why Dumbledore was able to hide the resurrection stone inside Harry's first snitch, and leave it to him in his will years later. It would only open for Harry because his skin had touched it first, during his first Quidditch match long before anyone knew what was hidden inside. Bowman Wright is buried in Godric's Hollow, the same graveyard Harry visited in Deathly Hallows while unknowingly carrying a snitch with the resurrection stone inside it. He had absolutely no idea, and if that does not perfectly summarize what it feels like to be Harry Potter, honestly nothing does. The Sword of Gryffindor. Most people know the Sword of Gryffindor as the thing Harry pulled out of a hat in second year, and used it to kill a basilisk. The actual history behind it is considerably messier. Godric Gryffindor commissioned it from Ragnuk I, the Goblin King, who crafted it from pure silver and set it with rubies. When it was finished, Ragnuk loved it so much he accused Gryffindor of stealing it and sent goblins to take it back. Gryffindor fought them off and sent them home with a threat. The grudge never left goblin memory, which is precisely why Griphook and Deathly Hallows considered the sword stolen property and felt completely justified demanding it from Harry. The argument was over 1,000 years old by the time they had it. The sword is enchanted to absorb anything that makes it stronger, which is why basilisk venom soaked into the blade after Harry used it in the chamber and made it capable of destroying Horcruxes. It also only appears to someone displaying genuine courage in a moment of real need, never to someone actively seeking it, which is why it came to Harry in the chamber and to Neville at the Battle of Hogwarts. Bellatrix was convinced the real sword was sitting safely in her Gringotts vault. It was not. The Ministry had quietly replaced a replica there without telling her. The real sword had already been claimed twice by people she would have considered completely beneath her, and there was nothing she could do about it. Now think about this for a second. Every single founder left behind a relic: Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem. All three became Horcruxes, vessels for the most fragmented and corrupted soul in wizarding history. Three founders' most prized possessions were turned into containers for Voldemort's darkness. And then there was Gryffindor's sword, the one relic Voldemort never touched, which happened to be the only object capable of destroying the other three. Whether that's a coincidence or something built into the sword's enchantment from the very beginning is a question nobody has ever fully answered. But the pattern is hard to ignore. Three founders' legacies were poisoned. The fourth one quietly cleaned up the mess. Ravenclaw's diadem. Rowena Ravenclaw engraved the words, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure," on a diadem she enchanted to enhance the wisdom of whoever wore it. Then her own daughter stole it, which says something uncomfortable about the limits of wisdom as a concept. Helena Ravenclaw grew up in her mother's shadow and eventually the jealousy won. She took the diadem and fled to the forest in Albania. Rowena kept the betrayal completely secret, fell fatally ill, and on her deathbed sent a man known as the Baron, who had loved Helena for years, to bring her home. He found her, but she refused to go back, and in a desperate rage he ended up killing her and then killed himself immediately after. Rowena died without seeing Helena again. Both of them became Hogwarts ghosts. Helena is the Grey Lady of Ravenclaw. The Baron is the Bloody Baron of Slytherin, still wearing the blood stains of what he did, never cleaned 1,000 years later. The films introduced both of them without explaining any of this. Centuries later, a young Tom Riddle charmed Helena into revealing where she had hidden the diadem. He retrieved it, turned it into a Horcrux, and hid it in the Room of Requirement. According to Pottermore, Helena deeply regrets telling him and carries that guilt into eternity. The diadem that was supposed to enhance wisdom spent decades containing a fragment of the most foolish soul in wizarding history, hidden in a room full of lost junk, until it was destroyed during the Battle of Hogwarts. The Marauder's map and the two-way mirrors. 4 teenagers made this. That's the detail worth sitting with. 4 students created a magical document so sophisticated it shows every single person inside Hogwarts in real time, their exact location, their name, their movement, including people under invisibility cloaks. The Ministry of Magic apparently had no idea it existed. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew created it because Remus was a werewolf, and they needed to move around the castle at night without getting caught. To support him, James and Sirius became unregistered animagi, which is extraordinarily difficult magic most adult wizards never manage. The map was a byproduct of the extraordinary lengths 3 friends went to for a 4th. It's widely believed among fans, and honestly hard to argue against, that James used the invisibility cloak to move through the castle undetected, while they mapped every corridor, secret passage, and hidden room. The cloak would explain how 4 students managed to chart a castle so thoroughly that even Dumbledore, who had lived and worked there for decades, did not know every secret it contained. Nobody has ever fully explained how teenagers produce something that sophisticated, and the invisibility cloak sitting in James's possession the entire time they were at Hogwarts is probably not a coincidence. The Marauders did not just chart the castle, they embedded their personalities into it. When Snape tried to use the map in Prisoner of Azkaban, it insulted him directly, calling him a greasy, dung-brained servant. That was not an accident. They programmed their personal contempt for Snape into the parchment itself decades before he ever touched it. Peter Pettigrew hid on that map for 12 years as Scabbers without anyone noticing. Sirius, who spent those same 12 years in Azkaban for a crime Peter committed, could theoretically have seen his old friend on the map if he had ever gotten his hands on it. The films never addressed that, and it is genuinely haunting. But the map was not the only thing the Marauders built out of that instinct to stay connected and protect each other. Before Sirius was arrested, he and James had a pair of two-way mirrors, enchanted so they could see and speak to each other whenever they were separated. Years later, Sirius gave his mirror to Harry for the exact same reason, so Harry could reach him directly rather than risking contact through the fire. Harry never used it. He forgot it existed until after Sirius was already gone, and when he finally found it at the bottom of his trunk, it was too late. The mirror sat unused while Harry watched his godfather fall through the veil, and that detail is one of the quietest tragedies in the entire series. The Marauders built 2 ways to find each other across any distance. Harry had both of them and never used either in time. The Deluminator. Dumbledore invented the Deluminator himself, and it is the only known one in existence. The films introduced it in the very first scene of Philosopher's Stone, used it once more in Deathly Hallows, and left everything genuinely interesting about it completely unaddressed. On the surface, it removes and restores light sources. That's the obvious function. What the film skipped is what it did to Ron in Deathly Hallows, and why that capability exists in something that appears to just turn off lights. After Ron abandoned Harry and Hermione during the Horcrux hunt, he spent weeks trying to find his way back. Then he heard Hermione say his name through the Deluminator. A small ball of light entered his chest near his heart, and it guided him across the country directly to where they were camping. That is not a feature you build into a light switch. Dumbledore specifically engineered that capability, which means he anticipated Ron would leave and would need a way back. The Deluminator responds to genuine emotional need and the sound of a name spoken with real feeling. It locates the emotional connection between people and uses it as a compass. Dumbledore left it to Ron in his will, not Harry, not Hermione, Ron specifically, because he had already seen far enough ahead to know which member of the trio would walk away and which one would need help finding his way home. Now, everyone's asking the same question. Did Dumbledore know Ron would leave from the beginning, or did he build that capability in just in case? The answer says everything about how far ahead Dumbledore was actually planning, and the films never once asked it. The Hand of Glory. The Hand of Glory comes from the real world, which makes it considerably more unsettling than most things on this list. The artifact was a genuine object from European occult tradition, documented extensively in 17th and 18th century grimoires across Britain, France, and Germany. According to folklore, it was the preserved and dried hand of a hanged criminal. A candle made from the fat of the same corpse was placed in its grip, and when it lit, it supposedly paralyzed every person in a building into a deep sleep except the person holding it. Thieves used it to ransack houses while occupants were frozen unconscious. It appeared in enough legitimate historical records that scholars took it seriously, and at least one preserved Hand of Glory still sits in the Whitby Museum in England today. Rowling took this directly from real occult history and dropped it into the wizarding world with almost no modification. In Chamber of Secrets, it sits in Borgin and Burke's, while Harry hides in a cabinet nearby. In Half-Blood Prince, Draco uses one to lead Death Eaters through Hogwarts in complete darkness, leaving everyone else unable to see. The film showed it being used without once explaining where the concept came from. The Hand of Glory is the most documentably real dark artifact in the entire series. Everything else Rowling invented. This one she found in actual historical records, and people genuinely believed in it for centuries. That's either fascinating or deeply uncomfortable depending on how you look at it. The Invisibility Cloak. Every invisibility cloak in the wizarding world eventually stops working. The fabric degrades, the enchantment fades, and after enough years it becomes useless. Every cloak except one. According to the tale of the three brothers, Death gave the youngest Peveril brother, Ignotus, a cloak as his gift. Unlike his brothers who asked for power and the ability to recall the dead, Ignotus asked for something that would let him walk away from death unnoticed. He lived a full life, and when he was finally old, he greeted death like a friend. The cloak passed to his descendants, never fading, never losing its power, which is eventually what confirmed to Dumbledore that it was the genuine Hallow rather than just an extraordinarily good cloak. What the movies didn't show is that the journey from Ignotus to Harry took 8 centuries and ran through one specific marriage. Ignotus's granddaughter, Iolanthe Peveril, married Hardwin Potter in the 13th century and brought the cloak into the Potter bloodline, where it stayed for generations, passing from father to son until it reached James. James left it with Dumbledore shortly before he was killed. Dumbledore held on to it for a full year, sending it to Harry anonymously on Christmas morning in first year. According to fan theory, not confirmed by Rowling, Dumbledore kept it because he was verifying it was the real Hallow and waiting for the right moment in a plan he had already begun building. Whether that is accurate or not, Dumbledore did nothing by accident, and the timing of that gift was deliberate. One last thing worth noting, the cloak made Harry invisible to virtually everyone, but not to Dumbledore, who could see him through it on multiple occasions, and not to Mad-Eye Moody, whose magical eye could apparently see through almost anything. How Moody managed it is never explained. How Dumbledore managed it is even less clear, and Rowling never fully addressed it. Some believe it is connected to his mastery of all 3 Hallows, giving him a perception no enchantment could block. No one knows for sure, and that question is very deliberately left open. The Pensieve. Nobody knows who invented the Pensieve, or when. It predates any recorded magical history, which in a world with 1,000 years of documented wizarding tradition is genuinely remarkable. The one Dumbledore owned was already ancient when he acquired it, found in his office at Hogwarts, suggesting it had belonged to headmasters before him for an unknown period of time. The film showed memories being extracted and viewed, which is accurate. What they skipped is that when you enter a Pensieve, you are physically inside the memory as a third party, able to observe things from the angles the original person never saw, including details that they never consciously noticed. Dumbledore used this specifically to find things Voldemort's acquaintances had witnessed without realizing the significance. But what the films never mentioned is that the Ministry of Magic also owns a Pensieve used in legal trials, and this raises an uncomfortable question the series never fully resolved. A memory submitted to the Ministry could theoretically be altered before submission, and there is no confirmed method of detecting whether a memory has been modified. Every trial conducted using Pensieve evidence carries that uncertainty. The film showed Dumbledore's memories as reliable truth. The reality is considerably more complicated, and given what the Ministry spent decades getting wrong, that should probably concern everyone more than it does. The Elder Wand. The Elder Wand has a trail of bodies behind it stretching back to the night it was created. Antioch Peveril asked Death for the most powerful wand in existence, received it, used it to kill an enemy, boasted about it in a pub, and was murdered in his sleep for it the same night. That's how its history began, and the pattern never changed. What the films compressed into a fairly clean ownership chain was actually centuries of theft and murder. Emmerich the Evil, a medieval dark wizard known for a short but brutal reign of terror, was one of its earliest documented owners. Egbert the Egregious defeated him for it. A dark wizard named Godelot used it to write one of the most dangerous books of dark magic ever recorded, Magic Most Evil, and was repaid for his efforts by his own son Hereward, who locked him in a cellar and took the wand. Each owner took it from the previous one by force, and each one eventually lost it in the same way. By the time it reached Grigorovich, the pattern had been repeating for centuries. Grindelwald stole it from Grigorovich and used it to build the most dangerous dark wizard empire of the 20th century before Dumbledore defeated him in 1945 in what is considered the greatest greatest duel in recorded wizarding history. Here is what the films handled badly. When Draco disarmed Dumbledore on the Astronomy Tower, the wand transferred its allegiance to Draco, not to Snape, who cast the killing curse. Wand allegiance follows the act of overpowering, not killing. So when Harry disarmed Draco at Malfoy Manor, the allegiance transferred to Harry without him ever touching the wand itself. The Elder Wand is made from elderwood with a core of thestral tail hair, a material so temperamental that no other known wandmakers use it. Thestrals can only be seen by those who have witnessed and accepted death, which means the wand's core is fundamentally connected to mortality. A wand that has caused more death than almost any other subject in wizarding history has death woven into its very core. The Resurrection Stone. You probably remember the tale of the three brothers from Deathly Hallows. Cadmus Peverell, the middle brother, asked Death for the power to recall the dead, because he thought that made him cleverer than death itself. Death handed him a stone and watched him walk away, presumably already knowing exactly how that was going to end. Cadmus Peverell used it to bring back the woman he loved, and destroyed himself in the process because she came back cold, distant, and unreachable, existing between worlds rather than truly returning. He could see her but not reach her, which is arguably worse than the original loss. He eventually took his own life to be with her. Classic Rowling. Gives you exactly what you asked for and make sure you regret it. But here is what the films never fully explained. That stone did not just ruin Cadmus, it eventually started a clock on Dumbledore's life, and that is the part of the story that changes everything. Marvolo Gaunt, Voldemort's grandfather, wore the stone as a ring for years, treating it as a family heirloom that proved his pure blood ancestry. When Voldemort found it, he saw the same thing, a valuable relic, and turned it into a Horcrux without ever realizing the stone set into it was one of the three Deathly Hallows. The most powerful resurrection object in wizarding history spent decades inside a Horcrux, completely unrecognized by the one person obsessed with cheating death. When Dumbledore eventually destroyed the Horcrux and found the stone inside the ring, he put it on knowing it was cursed, because he desperately wanted to see his sister Ariana and say the things he never got to say before she died. The curse spread through his hand immediately, and Snape could only slow it, not stop it. From that moment, Dumbledore had roughly 1 year left. So when Snape cast the killing curse on the Astronomy Tower, Dumbledore had already been dying for months. He already planned for it, and he had already made his peace with leaving. The man on that tower was not someone whose life was taken from him. He was someone who had already said his goodbyes, just not out loud. The Mirror of Erised. Harry found the Mirror of Erised in first year and saw his entire family alive and surrounding him for the first time in his life. The films gave you that moment, let you breathe for about 30 seconds, and then moved on. What they left out was considerably more interesting than what they included. Nobody knows who built it. Nobody knows when exactly, though it was created sometime before the late 1800s. Nobody knows how it ended up at Hogwarts. The best guess is that a teacher brought it back from their travels at some point, either because they understood what it did and were fascinated by it, or because they had absolutely no idea and just thought it looked interesting. What is known is that for roughly a century before Harry ever found it, the mirror had been sitting in the Room of Requirement, doing nothing, collecting dust, waiting. The name is Desire spelled backwards, and the inscription across the top, which looks like complete nonsense at first glance, is just, "I show not your face, but your heart's desire," written in reverse. The mirror shows whoever stands before it the deepest desire of their heart, not what is good for them, not what is realistic, just what they want more than anything else in the world. In the movies, we see what it was for Harry and Ron, but for Dumbledore, we never saw that. For Dumbledore, who admitted he had looked into it himself, it was his family whole and his sister Ariana restored to health. The man who spent his entire life appearing to have everything completely under control stood in front of that mirror and saw the same kind of irreversible loss Harry did, which reframes a lot of things about Dumbledore if you sit with it long enough. Now here is what the films glossed over. Dumbledore was so concerned about what the mirror did to people that he moved it multiple times before eventually enchanting it as the final protection for the Philosopher's Stone. Specifically so that only someone who wanted to find the stone but not use it could actually retrieve it. Anyone hoping to exploit it would see themselves using it but never get their hands on it. Harry, who wanted to protect it rather than use it for personal gain, was essentially the only person alive the enchantment would work for. Dumbledore built a protection that required genuine selflessness to break, and then trusted an 11-year-old to be that person without explaining any of this to him beforehand. Brilliant, irresponsible, or somewhere in between depending on how generously you read it. He later told Harry he saw himself holding a pair of thick woolen socks when he looked in the mirror. That was almost certainly not true, and both of them probably knew it. hat. The Sorting Hat. The Sorting Hat is over 1,000 years old and never been wrong about a student's house, writes an original song every year, and spent several years before the war explicitly warning the entire school about what was coming. Nobody listened. Very Hogwarts. All 4 founders created it together, each pouring their own values and personality into the enchantment, which means the hat makes judgments based on the actual personalities of 4 people who have been dead for a millennium, applied to children they never met. The films treated it like a talking hat that occasionally shouted a house name. The hat can be overridden. Harry asked not to be placed in Slytherin, and the hat respected it, which Dumbledore later told him was one of the most important choices he ever made. The hat takes the student's own preferences seriously precisely because the founders built that flexibility in deliberately, understanding that a student's own sense of identity mattered as much as their traits. What almost nobody knows is that the hat genuinely agonizes over difficult placements. Hermione was nearly sorted into Ravenclaw. Neville was nearly sorted into Hufflepuff. Peter Pettigrew was sorted into Gryffindor, which the hat apparently considered carefully and got catastrophically wrong, or got completely right depending on whether you believe people choose their house, or their house chooses them. That question has never been definitively answered, and the hat is not talking. Now, these were the artifacts, but what about all legendary wizards the Harry Potter movies never fully explained? That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Watch now before the Sorting Hat puts you in the wrong house.